There was a time when Linda Ronstadt's voice was everywhere, on car radios, jukeboxes, and summer nights that never seemed to end. She had the kind of voice that made you stop mid-sentence and just listen. To most of the world, she had it all: beauty, talent, fame, and the kind of success few ever touch. But those who truly listened could always hear something else behind the songs, a trace of longing, a kind of sadness that never quite left her. Now, at 78, Linda finally opens her heart about the years we all thought we knew so well. The love she lost, the silence she learned to live with, and the price she paid for chasing her dreams. This isn't a story about fame. It's a story about the quiet truth that waits when the spotlight fades. Linda Maria Ronstadt was born on July 15, 1946, in Tucson, Arizona, a quiet desert town where music floated in the air like dust and sunlight. Her family was warm, musical, and deeply rooted in both American and Mexican traditions. Her father, Gilbert, owned a hardware store but spent his nights singing Spanish ballads with a voice Linda never forgot. Her mother, Ruth, filled the house with old American tunes from the radio. For Linda, music was never just something you listened to. It was something you lived with. By the time she was a teenager, Linda's voice was already strong, a mix of sweetness and steel. People around Tucson started to notice that she wasn't like everyone else. She loved folk songs, but she also loved rock and Mexican music, and she wanted to find a way to bring them all together. Still, deep down, she knew she couldn't do that if she stayed in Tucson forever. At the University of Arizona, she tried to study, but the call of music was too strong to ignore. Then came Bob Kimmel, a local musician with big dreams and a restless heart. He was heading to Los Angeles to chase a career, and Linda decided to follow. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the kind that would change her life forever. Los Angeles was overwhelming. The city was noisy, full of competition, and not exactly kind to young dreamers. Linda shared small apartments, sang in smoky coffee houses, and waited for her chance. It finally came when she formed the Stone Ponies with Kimmel and Kenny Edwards. In 1967, their song Different Drum became a surprise hit. Its lyrics, about independence, about walking away instead of settling down, would come to define her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Fame arrived quickly, and with it came long tours, endless interviews, and a growing sense that her private world was slipping away. She was only 21, but already she understood something most people never do. Success can lift you higher than you ever dreamed, but it can also make you feel more alone than ever. By the early 1970s, Linda Ronstadt was everywhere. Her voice filled the airwaves, her image graced magazine covers, and her concerts sold out in minutes. She wasn't just a singer anymore. She had become the face of American rock. Critics called her the Queen of Rock, but even that title felt too small for the woman who could sing country, folk, pop, and Mexican music with the same natural grace. On stage, she looked invincible. Her voice was powerful, full of emotion and control. But offstage, Linda was often quiet, thoughtful, and deeply private. She once said that being on the road was like living in a time loop. Buses, hotel rooms, sound checks, and shows, repeated again and again. She loved performing, but the constant movement left little room for real relationships or peace. During this time, she dated several well-known men. There was J.D. Souther, a fellow musician who understood her better than most, but even that connection couldn't last under the pressures of fame. Then came Jerry Brown, the governor of California, a relationship that fascinated the public. For a while, they were the golden couple, the artist and the politician. They appeared on magazine covers, smiling together, but behind those smiles, Linda struggled with the lack of privacy that came with such attention. She once admitted that she found it hard to balance her personal and professional life. Every man she dated seemed to represent a different world, and she could never quite fit into either one. "He's really nice, but he's not musically inspired," she once said. And then you meet someone who's so musically inspired it takes your breath away. But he's impossible to live with. The world saw her as a confident, independent woman who had everything. But the truth was far quieter and lonelier. Linda often felt like an outsider, too famous to be normal, too introspective to enjoy the shallow glitter of the Hollywood scene. Behind the applause, she went back to her empty hotel rooms, carrying a growing question in her heart. Was success worth the solitude that came with it? By the end of the 1970s, Linda Ronstadt had become a legend. But legends, she would later say, are often built on sacrifices no one sees. As the 1980s began, Linda Ronstadt had everything most people could only dream of: money, fame, and admiration from around the world. But behind the headlines and applause, her personal life was complicated, fragile, and full of unanswered questions. After her relationship with Governor Jerry Brown ended, Linda's name continued to appear in the tabloids. In 1983, she began seeing Jim Carrey, a young comedian who was just starting to make his way in Hollywood. Their connection was intense but brief, lasting less than a year. Linda later described Jim as funny and full of energy, but also restless. Too restless for her quiet, reflective nature. Then came George Lucas, the visionary behind Star Wars. For several years in the mid-1980s, they were deeply involved. They were engaged for a time, and fans imagined the wedding of the century, the rock star and the filmmaker. But once again, Linda walked away. She later said that Lucas was kind, brilliant, and generous, but that they lived in two completely different worlds. The life she wanted, grounded, filled with music and family, didn't fit into his world of Hollywood, studios, and constant creation. For Linda, love was never the problem. It was the timing. Fame made ordinary life nearly impossible. She often said that relationships in the entertainment industry rarely survived. Relationships are almost impossible, she told Crawdaddy magazine in 1974. New opportunities flash before your eyes every 3 seconds. You're never around long enough. And the people you meet are other musicians. All competitive. As the years went by, Linda began to see that maybe marriage wasn't what she needed. I have no talent for marriage, she told the Washington Post in one of her most honest interviews. I don't like compromise. It has to be the way I want it. That might have sounded stubborn to some, but to those who knew her, it was simply honest. Linda was a woman who had built her life on independence. She couldn't imagine giving that up for anyone. And so, instead of chasing romance, she made another choice: motherhood. In the early 1990s, Linda adopted 2 children, Mary Clementine and Carlos. It was a quiet decision, made without publicity or fanfare. She raised them in Tucson, far from Hollywood, in a house filled once again with music. Friends said that for the first time, she seemed at peace. She wasn't running from tour to tour or interview to interview. She was simply home. Still, Linda never denied that she missed companionship. In her later interviews, she spoke openly about how difficult it was to find someone who could truly understand her. You meet one man who's nice but not musically inspired, she said. Then you meet another who's full of passion but impossible to live with. And then there's the problem of finding someone who can put up with you. It was an admission both humble and heartbreaking, a quiet acceptance that love for her was something that lived more easily in music than in real life. By the late 1990s, Linda Ronstadt had already lived several lifetimes in one. She had recorded dozens of albums, won multiple Grammy Awards, performed with legends, and crossed every musical boundary there was. But the spotlight that had once energized her now felt heavy, almost suffocating. She began to withdraw, step by step, from the life that had once defined her. In interviews, she often said that Los Angeles no longer felt like home. The air, the values, the constant race for attention, it all felt hollow. She moved north to San Francisco, looking for quiet, for something real. Her house there was modest, filled with books, family photos, and the sounds of old records spinning in the background. Later, she began splitting her time between San Francisco and Tucson, returning to the desert that had always grounded her. Those who knew her said she seemed peaceful, but different, like someone who had finally stopped running. She was no longer chasing fame or chart positions. She was raising her children, helping with school projects, cooking, reading, and spending quiet evenings with friends. Music was still there, but it no longer needed to be performed to be felt. By 2013, Linda Ronstadt had already lived a full and extraordinary life. She had crossed musical boundaries, from rock to country, pop to opera, Mexican folk to jazz standards. She had shared stages with the greatest artists of her time, loved deeply, raised 2 children on her own, and walked away from fame when it no longer felt like home. But nothing could have prepared her for the silence that came next. It began subtly. Her voice didn't respond the way it used to. The high notes felt out of reach, her vibrato disappeared, and her breath came shorter with each song. At first, she blamed it on aging, on exhaustion. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. "I knew it was over," she would later admit. "I couldn't sing, not even in the shower." Doctors confirmed what she feared most: Parkinson's disease. The diagnosis was devastating. There was no cure, no treatment, no way to regain control of the voice that had carried her through life. The sound that once filled stadiums and touched millions had simply vanished. For someone whose soul had always been intertwined with music, it was like losing her own heartbeat. Still, Linda refused to let the illness define her. She spoke about it with honesty, not pity. "I can't sing a note," she told AARP magazine that same year. "It's just gone." She wasn't bitter. She had simply accepted that her voice had lived its time. The same courage that once drove her on stage now helped her face the reality of silence. She spent her days between San Francisco and Tucson, dividing her time between the 2 places that had shaped her life. Her San Francisco home was peaceful, filled with books, art, and memories. She listened to classical pieces she once loved to sing, read poetry, and found comfort in quiet mornings. Friends often said that she still laughed easily, though her laughter carried a trace of melancholy, the sound of someone who had learned to make peace with loss. In 2014, the world honored her once again when President Barack Obama presented her with the National Medal of Arts. She stood quietly as the room erupted in applause. Her body trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from the illness. Yet her smile was calm, almost knowing. The recognition felt like closure. She no longer needed to prove anything. Her music had already done that. And when the applause faded, Linda Ronstadt, the woman who once gave voice to an entire generation, stood gracefully in silence. She had lost her greatest gift, but in that silence, there was still dignity, still strength, and still music, echoing softly in memory. In recent years, Linda Ronstadt has lived far away from the noise of fame. At 78, she is no longer the woman racing from stage to stage, dressed in denim and fire. Her world has grown smaller. A circle of family, a few close friends, the quiet hum of morning light in her Tucson home. But even as time has slowed her, her mind remains sharp, her heart steady, and her honesty disarming as ever. She divides her time between Tucson and San Francisco, the 2 cities that shaped her soul. Tucson, where she was born and learned to dream, and San Francisco, where she found peace after the storms of fame. Her homes are filled with books, art, and memories. Photographs of her children, Mary and Carlos, line the shelves. In the evenings, she often listens to classical records, Brahms, Gilbert, and Sullivan, or Mexican canciones that remind her of her father's voice. When she sits down for interviews now, there's no stage lighting, no makeup, no performance. Just Linda, calm, witty, and deeply reflective. She talks about the things that matter most, the craft of singing, the discipline behind the art, the stories buried in every song. "You can't fake a song," she once said in an NPR interview. "It either comes from the heart or it doesn't work." She also speaks openly about her illness, not with self-pity, but with quiet acceptance. Parkinson's disease has taken her physical strength, but not her spirit. In later interviews, she revealed that her condition has progressed to a rare form called progressive supranuclear palsy, which affects her movement and speech. Yet even through the tremors, her humor remains intact. "I still sing," she once joked, "just not out loud." When the 2019 documentary Linda Ronstadt, The Sound of My Voice, was released, it reintroduced her story to a new generation. The film, narrated in her own words, followed her rise, her struggles, and her final silence with tenderness and truth. It won a Grammy Award in 2021 for Best Music Film, a fitting tribute to a woman who had spent her life chasing honesty through sound. Around the same time, Linda appeared in the PBS American Masters series, sharing memories of her early days, her musical inspirations, and her family roots in Sonora, Mexico. She often spoke about her deep pride in her heritage, championing Mexican-American culture in an industry that had long overlooked it. Her 1987 album Canciones de mi Padre remains the best-selling non-English language album in American history, a fact she mentions not with pride, but with gratitude. Though she no longer tours or performs, Linda remains a quiet mentor to young musicians. She encourages them to stay true to their instincts, to ignore trends, and to keep their art honest. "Music is bigger than the person singing it," she once said. "You can lose your voice and still have something to say." Those words have inspired countless artists who see in her not just a singer, but a survivor. Her memoir, Simple Dreams, became more than a book. It became her second voice. In it, she told her story with the same sincerity that once filled her songs, the mistakes, the triumphs, the heartbreaks. She spoke candidly about the men she loved, the pressure of fame, and the strange loneliness that comes with success. There was no bitterness, only understanding. "I got to sing everything I wanted to sing," she wrote. "That's more than most people ever get." Today, Linda lives quietly, surrounded by music even in silence. Younger generations are rediscovering her through documentaries, vinyl reissues, and streaming playlists. Her songs, Blue Bayou, Long, Long Time, Desperado, You're No Good, play like memories people didn't know they still carried. And each time her voice rises again, it feels alive, untouched by illness, ageless, eternal. She once said she never wanted to be remembered as a rock star, but as someone who sang the truth. And maybe that's what she's finally admitted, that behind every song, every note of longing and heartbreak, Linda Ronstadt wasn't chasing fame. Linda Ronstadt gave us her voice, her songs, and her truth. Even though she no longer sings out loud, her music still lives in our hearts. Which of her songs do you remember first? Share your favorite in the comments below, and let's celebrate the music that never fades.